Hi, my name is Nate Soderstrom with the Capital Forum. I'm here with Seth Bloom. Seth is the president and founder of Bloom Strategic Counsel. He spent nearly 14 years on the Senate Judiciary Committee's antitrust subcommittee, where he served as general counsel from 2008 to 2013. Seth, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So we're discussing politics and antitrust. First question. On the merger side, how important is opposition or support from the antitrust subcommittee as far as what DOJ might do, as far as what the FTC might do, as far as how the public is seeing mergers? How important is the antitrust subcommittee?
You know, I worked there for 14 years, so obviously I think I'm a little bit biased about how important the antitrust subcommittee is, but I think the antitrust subcommittee really can play a constructive role in the process. And particularly, I think probably more important than support would be in the case where the antitrust subcommittee or its chairman opposes a deal. I think that can make a real difference. I think we saw that in 2011 when the AT&T T-Mobile attempted merger, where the chairman, Senator Cole, whom I worked for, came out very strongly against the merger. That merger, prior to our hearing, which was quite critical on the merger, and then Senator Cole's opposition to it, was thought to be almost, well, inevitable might be a too strong word, but very likely to happen. After our hearing, and in particular after our letter which expressed our opposition to the deal, I think the dynamic changed. So when one thinks about what the antitrust subcommittee does with respect to mergers, particularly when it undertakes hearings, it's really the only public examination of a deal. The rest of the merger review process is very opaque, it's confidential, and it sort of sets the public perception of the merger and,
Right.
the competitive issues in the merger.
So can the antitrust subcommittee kind of influence DOJ or the FTC directly? Is it indirect? Are they watching what the subcommittee is doing? What's the interplay between the agencies and the subcommittee?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of all of that. I think, you know, first of all, as a formal matter, the antitrust subcommittee cannot approve or disapprove a merger, but the people that run the Justice Department's antitrust division and the commissioners of the FTC, they're essentially all very political people, and they watch to see what the reaction to things are on Capitol Hill. It's not a one-to-one. The antitrust subcommittee says block a merger, the merger will be blocked. However, I think if the antitrust subcommittee or its chairman, as I say, makes a strong statement about a merger, you can be sure the antitrust regulators and the agencies are going to want to make sure the issues that the oversight committee has raised are looked at and looked at carefully. So I think it's an example to it's exercising influence, not dispositive, saying this is what the antitrust subcommittee says is going to happen, but it exercises influence. And by the way, influence can be exercised not just through a hearing process, but through all sorts of informal contacts between the staff of the antitrust subcommittee and the staff of the Justice Department, or the sort of the front office of the Justice Department, or the chairman's staff at the FTC. Or, you know, there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, are ways that the antitrust subcommittee can exercise its influence, and again, particularly the chairman. So I do think it's an important stop for those folks who are considering a merger, particularly one that's going to raise a lot of public scrutiny and concern.
Right. How extensive are the contacts between staff on the antitrust subcommittee and either DOJ or FTC? I guess during the course of, say, a 9-month or year-long merger.
I mean, it actually differs between the Justice Department and the FTC.
Okay.
The Federal Trade Commission has a formal process where they will bring their staff to engage in confidential briefings about what the status of the investigation is and the what issues are being looked at. In the context of this, the staff of it's a two-way interchange. I mean, the FTC staff will say where they are, and the subcommittee staff will say, well, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? We've got concerned about this. That is a sort of a formal process, and it's a really thorough process. In the case of the Justice Department Antitrust Division, they don't do that. And their entire investigation is entirely confidential, even to congressional staff. But there'll be a sort of a one-way dialogue where staff will discuss with the leader, you know, the leadership of the front office, the staff of the leadership of the front office, sort of what the staff has found. You know, sort of suggest you ought to look at these issues, and the people of the Justice Department Antitrust Division will sort of listen and not really respond. But that's also an opportunity to exercise influence. And on occasion, you know, the chairman will talk to the the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust or the Chairman of the FTC.
Right.
So there's another way for influence to be exercised.
So is it fair to say the antitrust subcommittee has more influence over the FTC than DOJ, or is it just a matter of DOJ is kind of less forthcoming with?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably say the latter. DOJ is less forthcoming. It's hard to make a blanket statement that the antitrust subcommittee has more influence over the FTC than with the DOJ. Although I think these briefings, these confidential briefings, are important. And we certainly, in the almost 14 years that I was on the subcommittee, we were very close to the FTC. And the fact that we had these briefings did enable us to develop relationships with the staff that were working on the case in a way that we couldn't do with respect to the Justice Department.
Right, that certainly makes sense.
Yeah.
To go to the concrete, the airline settlement.
Sure.
That was something where people had discussed the possibility that politics had played a role,
Right.
especially in the settlement. That may have been something where if people were talking about the influence of politics, it would have been not the Senate, but perhaps the executive branch, perhaps the unions, perhaps folks outside of the Senate.
Right.
When you look at the airline settlement, is it fair to say that politics played a role there? And if so, kind of how much?
Well, I don't know. But it is very interesting to notice a few facts about the airline settlement. When the Justice Department filed the case, and it was a very strong, comprehensive complaint against the deal, involving over 1,000 routes and allegations about coordination amongst the airlines, a case that was much more than just Reagan National Airport or New York LaGuardia or the 5 airports where they got relief. At that time, the Assistant Attorney General said, the only thing we want to see coming out of this is a full-stop injunction. Filing a very strong case, full-stop injunction, we think this merger is really anti-competitive. If we fast forward to, and that was in August of last year, if we fast forward to November, suddenly we see this settlement, which addressed the minority, that didn't address most of the allegations of the complaint, and which I think is accurately characterized on a national level as a very weak settlement. We see that settlement, and we see the Assistant Attorney General say, this is better than if we had gotten a full-stop injunction. What happened between August and November? It's very odd. One thing we do know that happened is that the Attorney General said about a week before the settlement, I hope this case settles. A very unusual statement in the course of a merger investigation or litigation, and in the course of settlement negotiations for the Attorney General himself to get involved in this way, in a very public way. So one has to ask the question, I don't know what happened, but in my experience in antitrust, working in antitrust, I have never seen a case like that where there was such a turnabout by the Justice Department, where we saw, sort of a statement or such direct interest from the Attorney General. It's legitimate to ask the question.
Right, fair point. Last question. How important is influence from groups that, not elected officials, but groups like unions, groups like public interest organizations, business organizations kind of outside the sphere of kind of elected officials? How much influence can those types of groups have on merger review?
It would be my hope they would have little influence. The agencies, and I think by and large they do a very professional job, they're supposed to basically look at the facts and what the impact of a competition, and not sort of be pressured by organized interest groups. Now, to the extent that these groups represent consumers or people that can be affected by the merger, they can, through the normal course of the investigation, be resources for the antitrust investigators. But I think, it has been a hallmark of antitrust enforcement in the United States, at least for the last 30 or 40 years, that it's been pretty immune from those kinds of influences. And, you didn't ask me, but I sort of want to address this because you said it was the last question. This whole subject of politics and antitrust, is it sort of legitimate for the political process to get involved in antitrust investigations? I think when you think of the word politics, you have to think of two different things. And some of politics is a member, sticking up for his or her constituents or his or her campaign donors, and saying, please leave this merger alone, don't. And that really is not a legitimate exercise of politics and antitrust, and I hope is mostly disregarded, because every member is going to have constituents or interests. You can't have a vote and say, is this merger a good thing? I would think that the influence of politics, if you want to use that word, which is constructive in antitrust, is the influence that we did on the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee, on the House Antitrust Subcommittee as well, sort of the experts who are concerned to see in the in an oversight capacity that the antitrust laws are being enforced properly. And in that regard, and I know this is somewhat of a controversial notion amongst antitrust practitioners, I think Congress really does have a role, because there's nothing sacred about antitrust that should take it outside of the oversight of the oversight committees in Congress in our separation of powers and checks and balances as any other function of government. You know, whether it's environmental protection or you name the function of government, it's appropriate to have legislative watchdogs. And I think in that kind of oversight is a positive effect of, if you want to use the word politics, on antitrust.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thanks a lot, Seth. Appreciate it. Great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.